So you are going to love my guest today. She is going to bust some myths about sexuality in midlife because she literally wrote the book on it. And she's a doctor, so it's all certified. We're all safe. And I was really happy to be connected to Dr. Rachel Carlton Abrams by our mutual friend, Leslie Kenny, who you probably know is the queen of spermidine. So thank you, Leslie, for this beautiful introduction. Dr. Rachel studied at the famous Stanford University, and she's graduated with honors, got her doctorate from UC San Francisco, and she even has a master's degree in holistic health from UC Berkeley. These are all like major universities, academic universities in the US. And she's got a lot of other cool stuff too, but we'll talk about that later. Dr. Rachel is board certified in family medicine and integrative medicine. In 2008, she opened up the Santa Cruz Integrative Medicine Clinic, where she treats some of the world's most influential people, like big shot CEOs and billionaire entrepreneurs and Nobel Peace Laureates and this pretty fancy stuff. But what's even cooler is that she's been voted as the best doctor in Santa Cruz County every year since 2009. And it looks like no one is even close to breaking that track record. And what I love about her too as a gerontologist, and I really respect, is that she's super dedicated to creating health equity and anti-racism in healthcare. And this is something that's so important and a lot of people are not even aware of. And Dr. Rachel is also an author. She wrote the books. Hang on, there are a lot of them. We have to read them all. She wrote Body Wise, Discovering Your Body's Intelligence for Lifelong Health and Healing. 8 Dates, Essential Conversations for a Lifetime of Love. Totally could use that one. The Man's Guide to Women. And she wrote that one with her husband. And The Multi-Orgasmic Woman. That's the one we're going to talk about today. And The Multi-Orgasmic Couple. And she also created the audiobook Taoist Sexual Secrets. So your winter reading list is done, and now warm up the bed. And Dr. Rachel, she doesn't stop. She loves teaching courses, and over the last 20 years, she's been working as a consultant, holistic health for national magazines and radio and television. So you probably have run into her somehow, somewhere before. And she's not only a practicing doctor, she's an author, she's a speaker and consultant, but she's also been a board member of the American Holistic Medical Association. And she's now an active board member of the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, where she works on anti-racism, health equity, and inclusive membership. She's just way too cool, guys. So please now, without further ado, meet Dr. Rachel. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
This is so exciting. I have to say, I loved your book. I read The Multi-Orgasmic Woman, and I'm just so excited to read the others. And it was a super easy read. It's one of those things I think everybody needs to have by their bedside. And I'm dying for a retreat here in Europe. You've given workshops?
Yeah. Absolutely. In fact, on the call today is my sister, Lisa Carlton, and we taught retreats on female sexuality twice a year for about 15 years running at Esalen Institute here in California.
Yes.
Took a little break for COVID reasons and fire reasons and all kinds of other things, but certainly a possibility. I love coming to Europe.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going to help you organize it because we need you here. And because of reading the book is fantastic, but it's one of those things where you're like, okay, I want to really put this in practice now. You want to have a visual or a video or someone to guide you through it. So I can really see how your workshops and retreats have been very, very popular and inspiring. So, but I really, before we get into the book, I want to just to understand what inspired you to go deeper into medicine and become a functional medicine practitioner, and because this takes extra time, it takes extra money, and you've already spent a lot of time just becoming the traditional doctor. I want to know a little bit why you decided to take this step. And
Well,
when?
it's deep in me. My father is a pastor. I grew up really kind of living that mind, body, spirit life. In fact, I think I wrote my essay to Stanford for admission on that topic.
Mhm.
um, and I love medicine. I really do. I love Western medicine. I know a lot of people hate it. It's not that I don't see the problems. There's an inordinate number of problems, but for what it does well, it's extraordinary. It's just like this big in a field of health that's this big. And,
Mhm.
you know, when you look at ancient systems of healing, like Chinese medicine, for example, which I've worked with a bit, there is there's an exercise part, Tai Chi, Qigong. There's a healing part, acupuncture, and herbal medicine. There's a dietary part. There is a sexual medicine part. And it is the same in its kind of, sibling tradition, Ayurvedic medicine. Western medicine likes to just take out the biomedical model and absent it from everything else. And we know how well that's working. Not very freaking well.
Yeah.
The United States, which really epitomizes that paradigm, I think we're like number 35 in the world for our health statistics. And we spend twice as much per person as the next country behind us. So it is failing. It is failing on a grand scale. And it's failing because it's not taking into account all of these other things. I'm a primary care doctor. 90% of people who come into a primary care physician's office have something wrong with them from lifestyle, which is a big term, which is the everything else that we talk about. It's how you eat and whether you move and whether you love people and your relationships and your work and your exposure to toxins and everything else is what makes people sick for the most part. So oddly, when you don't address those things, when that's not your primary way of treating people, it doesn't work very well and it's expensive. So here we are. And I'm not someone who does what I do I have to go to work to pay my rent job, which I do, by the way. That's not a problem, and that's a good thing. But I have to have satisfaction from what I do, or I wouldn't do it. And it is not satisfying to treat people with ineffectual, incomplete medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, since we're talking about women over 50 today, proud to be a member of that club, by the way.
Yay. Welcome.
That for women over 50, a typical patient will walk into my office and let's see, she's stressed. She's got, teenage or young 20s kids. She's in a relationship, not in a relationship, struggling one way or the other. She's in this perimenopausal space. We're going to talk about that a lot, where there is a tsunami of hormonal changes that are occasionally gentle. I occasionally have women in my practice that go through it without a lot of drama, but not very many. Mm-hmm. And a lot of women don't recognize that what they're experiencing is in fact hormonally induced. So, insomnia, anxiety, irritability, and then all of the impacts on sex. And every single one of the things I mentioned impacts sex. And one of the things I like about teaching about sex is if you ask about sex, you will learn about everything else. Because it's about, do you feel safe? How'd you grow up? What's your relationship with your body? Can you feel and relate to your body? Do you have enough space in your life and to even think about pleasure? Do you honor yourself? Do you make time for yourself? Do you have a body that's healthy enough to have sexual pleasure? And what are your relationships like? This is the big one. Right? For most people, although sex with yourself is legitimate and important, and I highly encourage it. If you're going to have sex with someone else, then that relationship becomes very important. And who has models of healthy relationship? I mean, come on, it's challenging, very few people. And there are some, and no relationship is perfect, nor should it be, but it's tough. So I like sex because I think of it as the canary in the coal mine. It is the thing that if we can solve this puzzle for you, if we can figure out for you what holds you back from having your full pleasure, wow, we will have along the way solved a whole bunch of other issues that impact you globally.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's so great that you're in this space and you make it comfortable to talk about, because I can imagine I imagine how lucky your patients are, because most doctors don't really even ask the question, what's your sex life like, or what's going on? And if you did somehow bring it up, it's just, yeah, you probably get an antidepressant or something like that. So
which will kill your sex drive, by the way.
yeah, exactly. And this is what I want to talk about too, because what I learned in your book was fascinating, of all these blocks that women can have in terms of reaching orgasm or having a healthy sex life. So it's, let's talk a little bit about an orgasm, especially in the medical sense, because you explain this fantastically in the book, and why are we so focused on the orgasm? Some people don't even orgasm. I mean, you mentioned a quarter of all women in the US have never had an orgasm, and more than half of them are not regularly. What?
1 out of 4.
1 out of 4. It's crazy. So, then, let's like explain what it is and why is it such a big deal?
It's a great question. I'm gonna sidestep a little bit by saying that when I speak with people, I really try to focus on sexual pleasure, because most women I know already feel like there are 100 boxes they're supposed to fit in, and what their weight is and what they're capable of, and did they achieve enough, and having an orgasm can be another box that feels like something I'm supposed to do and I can't, and so there's something wrong with me. So I'd like to begin with saying I actually don't care if people have orgasms. I wrote the book to help if you want to, but I've got women in my practice who have super satisfying, intimate lives for them who don't have orgasm. And oh, by the way, I mean, I mentioned we could talk a little bit about gender issues too, which is fascinating to me. I'm teaching a lot about how, we talk about men and women as if they're super separate categories. And, there are physiologic differences of someone born female and born male. That is absolutely true. Not trying to say it's not. But when you think about the gender categories that we have, man and woman, they overlap far more than they are different. And it's not, there is a giant divide in the middle in which you could be all kinds of things, right? You can have, and most of us are, by the way. I have a ton of masculine gender characteristics. It's one of the things I like best about myself. So in a way, sexuality is the same. So orgasm, when Masters and Johnson started doing their research now quite some time ago, but God bless them for putting the lens on sex in the Western science world. But they did it from a Western science model, right? There aren't even thousands of years of Tantra and Taoist sexuality looking at orgasm from a completely different point of view, right? That you could have many of them, that they could unfold, that it could be a plateau, that, all these ideas. And Masters and Johnson defines the orgasm when they start studying it scientifically as being arousal, which physiologically, if you're measuring it in the lab like they were, means blood flow to the genitals. So in a guy, that ends up in some sort of erection in the penis. And in a lady, we get erections too. The analogous tissue, and what I mean is when a baby's developing, the tissue that becomes the penis in a male becomes the vulva and the clitoris in the female. So that vulvar tissue gets expanded, and some of you will be familiar with this, maybe never thought about it, but I once had a friend who called it getting a wide on. Get aroused. But those tissues, the labia, the tissues fill with blood and they get puffier. And then, of course, they secrete lubrication, which is so important for sexual pleasure, ultimately. And then the clitoris also swells. So that's erection or arousal. So that's the first part. And then orgasm is when, after arousal happens, note, impossible to have orgasm without arousal. Just put that in your pocket, because there's a whole bunch. I just watched yet another sex scene on television and went, oh, for God's sakes, seriously. I mean, I know time is limited, but it's just ridiculous.
To cut to the chase.
It's ridiculous. Nobody has an orgasm that fast from intercourse, no less, which isn't even touching her clitoris. Anyway, so there's arousal, and then there's and then there's orgasm. So orgasm is pleasurable rhythmic contractions of the pubococcygeus muscle. We call it the PC muscle for short. So that's a sling of muscle between your pubic bone. If you reach down, touch your pubic bone in the front and your sacrum in the back, which is the bottom of your spine, that triangle thing between your buttocks. There is a muscle that goes between them that surrounds the vagina and the urethra in females. And that contracts rhythmically. By the way, so does the uterus, interestingly. We could talk about, and the cervix, which is part of the uterus. And that's orgasm. And then there is a release, Masters and Johnson here, a release of arousal and denouement. So that's the end. And then you could perhaps have another one. But it turns out it's just way more, that's a male orgasm, which, by the way, that's not even accurate, because men can have multiple orgasms too without losing arousal. We can talk about that later if we want to. But for women, we can get aroused, have orgasmic contractions, then have them wane, then have them again, then have a couple more. We can have, I call it like your orgasmic fingerprint, which is also not exactly accurate, because not only is it different person to person, it's different, in different times that you're aroused. So it can be pretty much anything, including extended arousal for quite a long period of time, though that's exhausting for most people. So they decide to, take a break.
This is what I was blown away with in your book. Like, I just didn't even know there was all this stuff. And, I was like, so this is exciting for me. I'm 51. And so I really want to gear this podcast towards older women and explain this stuff. And how in the world did I get here and not know how to have sex? It seems to be like, when you're in your 20s, you don't really think about some of the stuff that you talked about in the book. So part of me wonders, okay, so you've gone through some amazing techniques that I think everyone should read this book and learn, because you do start out with talking a lot about managing stress through your inner smile techniques and just wonderful techniques. Because I think you're absolutely right. It's hard to get into a sexual mode if you're all stressed out, have no energy, or have some tension and all that. So I love that part. And then you go into some amazing other techniques that we can use in our practice, and how we can get to another higher level and this other consciousness. And you're like, wow, this is a whole other world. Like, where have I been? And sometimes I do reflect, when I was in my 20s, I was like, well, it kind of happens naturally when you're in that state. So what happens when we're getting
not wrong? That's not wrong, right? That's true.
Yeah. And so, you kind of naturally do this without really thinking about it or getting these states, and you're discovering your body, and it just seems to go wherever it goes. And then something happens along the way and we get lost. And as older women, we have kids, and we've had marriages, multiple of them maybe, and divorces. And so, why, when I think about, okay, I'm going to try these techniques and see all this stuff, why was it so natural back then? Or maybe I didn't even, maybe I'm just having a misconception and just having a fantasy memory or something. But where did we get lost in this? And do men get lost like this? Or they just say, we're, it's been the same since I was 20. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it changes for men too. So it's a misnomer to say that men are just always raring and ready to go. And I'm not saying that there aren't some men like that, because there are, but I treat men and women, and not all men, for sure. Here are the statistics about it. Females, I love that you had a natural and easy sex life in your 20s. God bless. It should be that way for everybody. It isn't. Lots of females in their 20s don't feel comfortable in their bodies. And specifically, and this is kind of what you're referring to in the book, they don't know how to have pleasure, because nobody ever talked to them about it. I feel like I did sex education for a little bit, because it makes me crazy that we learn about condoms, but we don't learn about our own anatomy and how to touch ourselves. It's ridiculous. It's really ridiculous. And we want young people to take all those healthy hormones and that sex drive and not know how to pleasure themselves. That doesn't make any sense. So in the 20s, lots of women don't have orgasms because they don't know how. And they're very busy and focused, as society has told us to do, whether you have a female or male or gender non-binary partner, on your partner's pleasure. And if you're focused on your partner's pleasure, you're not focused on yours. And this is where having a male body and having a female part in terms of sexuality, which is for a male body to have a pleasurable orgasm. It's just not that difficult. It's super
well, they're going to
easy.
slow down, right? That's
It's
their big
super
problem.
easy, right? We have to like this. Yeah, right. Exactly. Super easy. Female body. And here's how the Taoists talk about it: that a male sexual arousal is like fire. It's fast, it's hot, and then it burns out. A female sexual arousal is like water. And you should know in the Taoist system, water is considered the strongest substance on earth because over time it erodes everything. And it's bendable, right? So the Taoists really liked yin. They really honored water and sort of this way of being. Female arousal requires heating of the water. So there has to be an engagement of the whole body. And, you know, I love this too, in Chinese medicine, many of you probably know this, but the body is on the hand, you know, the whole body is represented on, or on the ear is represented on the ear. It's also represented on the genitals. So the part of the genitals that represents the heart is the opening to the vagina. And so, and one of the other sayings I really like is, unless this heart is open, this heart is not open, you know? And I don't mean it has to be romantic love in some, you know, made up fairy tale way. I just mean you're having fun. It's good. You like this person, you're attracted to them. You know, it doesn't matter whether this is a 30-year marriage or this is a hookup, but that doesn't matter. But your heart is open. And if it's not, if you're scared, if you're distracted, if you're stressed, first of all, vagina is closed, so sex can be uncomfortable. And secondly, it's going to interfere with arousal. So pot of water, we got to start the boil, right? This is why playfulness and flirting and anything that turns you on, which could be exercise or dancing or music or great food or a glass of wine or whatever, you know, something that actually begins to help you feel in the mood is not a small thing. It's fundamental to everything going well. And that starts hours before you get to getting your clothes off and your genitals meeting each other. And so boiling water. So we start there. And then, you know, the water boils. But once the water boils, it can boil and boil and boil and boil. So in the Taoist tradition, female sexuality is considered far stronger than male sexuality because it doesn't have that quick and it's out quality. It has this, you know, perpetual boiling for a long time quality. But it takes a little longer to get started.
Interesting. Yeah, sounds like twigs burning out quickly or having a big log on the fire. So to have a long lasting burn.
And to be fair, we don't currently live, at least in, I'm just going to say in developed countries, in Western countries, in many countries, some countries, like if you go to Brazil, you know that there's like timeliness is not really that cultural genius, you know, it's not really what Brazil is about. But man, do they take their time and dance and they swing their hips and they are embodied. It's such an beautiful, gorgeous embodied culture. And it's easy to teach about sexuality there because all that boiling the pot stuff is an inherent part of the culture. And I would say a little more in Southern Europe, less so in Northern Europe, less so in the United States. You know, it's some of this is cultural, but the water boiling thing, that's not optional. That's necessary for everybody.
That's interesting because that was one of my questions was in your practice, are you seeing different responses to talking about sex and sexual health with different ethnicities depending 100%. On the culture? Yeah.
Yes. So I had a couple in my practice that I adored. They were Latinx. Their parents were immigrants from Mexico. They got married when they were 19 and they were virgins. And I will tell you that usually that recipe, because I have a number of people in my practice, is not a great recipe for sex, because no ability to experiment, nobody helping them understand what to do. It can be a tough way to go, which isn't to say that you can't have great sex, but they had an awesome sex life because in their culture first of all, flirting is awesome. And, being hot and, talking to each other that way and being good communicators around sex, which is the number one most important thing in terms of having sex with another human, is your ability to communicate what you like. And this is what I talk to women about all the time because, and that's the difference between that natural time in your 20s where it all happened because the water was boiling, right? You had whatever was going on in your life. You were not so distracted. And your hormones were on point. And so it was easier. But when you're more distracted, you have to go, oh, how did I do that? How did that work? How do I do that again? How do I recreate that? And some of it is that pre-arousal stuff. And some of it is technique. So this is the other thing that I talk about a lot is you have to understand your own anatomy and how you like to be touched. And by the way, it is different for everybody. So there's no map to your body other than the one you make for yourself. So I think that self-pleasure is really essential. And because it's the only way you can then be with another person and be able to adequately communicate what you need for pleasure.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I grew up in the US. So, same, sexual education where you don't really talk about this stuff. My parents didn't talk to me about sex either. It just was one of those awkward teenage years and you're just looking at movies and talking to your friends. And, you don't really, sometimes I feel like, wow, you don't really, it's not really intuitive, really. Like, and it reminded me of breastfeeding as well. It was like, oh, it's just natural.
Exactly.
And when the babies came, I was like, I don't know what to do.
It's really complicated. Yeah. Oh, it's natural. Oh, really?
Yeah. So
it's not. I mean, it's complicated. And by the way, we have all the techniques. It's sort of like global warming right now. We actually have all the solutions. We just have to implement them. It's sort of the same with orgasm and breastfeeding, right? We know how to help people do it, but you have to have the information. So that's the other piece, is really understanding your anatomy and how it works and how important your clitoris is, for example.
Yes.
90% of women orgasm from clitoral stimulation, and clitoral stimulation doesn't happen during heterosexual penetrative sex.
That is so interesting. There's so many things I learned from this book. And I also had a great podcast interview with Kim Anami. Do you know?
Yeah.
Kim, so she was talking about the 11 different orgasms. And I was like, I thought there was just one, So maybe you can talk a little bit about what is the difference between the clitoral, the cervical, and vaginal orgasms, just to name the first, a couple out of many
Right.
that we can have.
Right. I feel like I should have a little warning box, like a pack of cigarettes here. Warning, this is not a to-do list. Okay. This is not another box through which you get to beat yourself up because you only have one orgasm instead of 12 different orgasms. Right. And by the way, can we really differentiate between a cervical orgasm and a vaginal orgasm and a not really, not really. Hello. Anatomy's connected. The nerves are all connected. The hormones are certainly all connected. So don't get hung up on I should be having. What she's saying is I should be having more orgasms than I am, and I should be having them in these 12 different ways. Okay, so I'm not saying that. But not surprisingly, because it is really in the interest of our evolution that we enjoy sex, because that is procreation and that is how we produce children, and that's what we're designed for. Now, that's not why most of us are having sex. Occasionally, but the great majority of the time, that is not why we're having sex. But still, we're created for pleasure. So it's not surprising that, the other thing I find silly about this is when I was in my medical training, this is back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, I watched a film that just had such a huge impression on me for a sexuality class. I was trained in San Francisco. That was helpful. And this was a guy who they'd done a documentary about who was paralyzed from the neck down. And he had a lover and he had orgasms. And for real, y'all, orgasms, because the orgasm happens between the ears, not between the legs. He had orgasms from ear stimulation because, just like when someone is blind, their sense of smell, their sense of hearing, their proprioception is all heightened, right? The other senses become much more sensitive. If you shut down sensation in one part of the body, another part of the body becomes more sensitive. So yeah, honest to God, ear orgasms in this guy. And they had a great sex life.
Amazing.
Because hello, he could provide oral sex. If we're talking about, what can a lover do for a female that's most likely to cause pleasure? Oral sex.
Yeah.
Oral sex. And by yourself, a vibrator. There's certain things that just work well because of the anatomy. But every part of your tissue is designed for pleasure. So yes, you can have a cervical orgasm. You can have many vaginal orgasms, not just in one spot named after some male doctor, but like in lots of spots. The Z spot and the UFEs, there's the vagina is a pleasure organ. The vulva is a pleasure organ, not just the clitoris, but the lips and the extent of the clitoris, which goes underneath the lips. And you can have an orgasm from nipple stimulation, and you can have an orgasm from anything. So let's just like get out of the box about where we feel like we have to have pleasure and orgasm from a spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you do cover so many of those great areas, like you just back of the neck or anywhere. And when you think about it, and I just do love that you actually literally write down, here's how we do it, step by step. Get your mirror out, or you sit on a chair, or whatever it is that you want to do. So It got me thinking a little bit. Well, do you have videos of or audios? Because I can see myself reading the book. Okay,
there's audios. There are audios.
Yeah.
So if you go to drrachel.com, all the exercises from the multi-orgasmic man on the speaking page are at the bottom there.
Excellent. There we go. So I was like, okay, until a retreat happens, then let's get some audios in, because you do go through some great thing. And it reminded me a little bit about when I would read about Joe Dispenza, and he talked about I would read the meditation. I'm like, I just need to listen to it, or the oxygen advantage, the breathing technique. I was like, I need to listen to it. So this is one of those books where you need to get the audio as well and practice it, because that's where the magic happens. And so I want to get a little bit back to a woman over 50 in her 60s or 70s, even 80s, whatever we're talking about, and how sex is happening, what's changing in the sexual field in that area, and the blockages that you're seeing. Because as I said before, I grew up in the US like you, and so we're not really taught these things, whereas say my husband is French, and they're listening at 3 o'clock when you pick up the kids on the radio. They're having talks about sex and orgasms and penises. And for them it's quite big topless women on the beach. It's it's so different depending on the culture that you grew up in. And I could see some of these blockages living with us for the rest of our life. And I remember, I don't know where I heard it from, but where when even we change a diaper of a girl, and if she starts to play around with her vagina, we remove it and just put the diaper back on. And that's just sort of the instinct. So we're taught from babyhood not to touch this area. I mean, really, we need more people like you going into schools and explaining and breaking some of these. And I find it surprising that your dad was, what you say, Baptist minister, or
is it? Well, luckily no, he was a Methodist minister, so it was less strict. He was very liberal, a sex positive, if you can imagine, pastor.
Oh, good. Okay, so I was wondering, how did you make that transition?
Yeah, exactly.
So what are some of the blockages other, than maybe your culture, that women you're seeing with women who are over 50 coming to your clinic, and in terms of reaching, having a healthy sex life? Because let's not talk about orgasms, ejaculation, but just healthy sexual lifestyle. And what does that even mean?
Yeah. So it's a big question. And I just want to start it with this idea that if you embrace your sexuality, if you embrace your own pleasure, it is a significant act of cultural resistance. in the best way, because the culture says women's pleasure doesn't matter. It says you should be doing things to help other people and not yourself. It says you should be dieting, you should be exercising, you should be working your body to fit into our idea of what's acceptable. And when you pleasure yourself, you blow that shit up. And all of that is created to oppress you. It's just, it's created to limit the greatness of your being, your great intelligence, your profound experience in life. We need women in their 50s to be fully, and not just 50s, 50 plus. I have, God bless, my most amazing mother-in-law on this podcast too, who said, and I quote, "Everyone is responsible for their own orgasm." Thank you, Mom. Awesome. She's fabulous. So, and my mentor, I'm catching a plane this afternoon to go see my mentor. She's 101 and
Wow.
she's still an active doctor.
Wow.
All right. Giving talks. So we are in our power zone after 50, and being fully embodied and being not just willing, but intent upon and insisting upon having pleasure makes us powerful. It makes us powerful, and it allows us to do everything else we want to do. This isn't a little thing. This is not just something I do kind of on the side because it's fun for me. This is a radical act, radical in the sense of the root of radical, at the root. I wanted to, and then I swear I'm going to talk about what you asked me about, but I want to give this quote. There's a book I read recently called Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown, which I would highly recommend, y'all. And she says, there is no way to repress pleasure and expect liberation, satisfaction, or joy. Wow. And I really agree with that. Here's another question she asks that I think is really fantastic. What would I be doing with my time and energy if I made my decisions based on a feeling of deep, erotic, orgasmic yes? So I want to introduce here that understanding your own pleasure, that being in touch with it, with knowing how to give it to yourself, with reveling in it, allows you to have the wherewithal to have a whole body yes in your life. Like, oh God, I'm limping along in this difficult relationship with male, female, gender non-binary, doesn't matter, with another human. And the longer I go on, the more dead I become inside. Wow, that's a huge body no. That's a big body no. Something either has to change or you need to leave. So when we're able to open ourselves up to pleasure, then we can actually get these body signals, like that feeling you get in your gut about something. Really important. And there has never been a time on the planet that it was more important for women over 50 to be fully embodied and to step into their full power. And that includes your pleasure, because your pleasure it's your human joy. Why were we given these bodies anyway? We're here so that we can enjoy, learn, and help. That's it. Mm-hmm. But many of us skip the first one. We learn, we help, we don't enjoy. And the enjoyment is part of it. I pointed to Brazilian culture earlier, but there's a culture where joy or a lot of African culture, joy, celebration, music, dance is a huge, just part of the normal day-to-day life, right? We need that. Having sexual pleasure is a piece of that. It's just for you. It's like this, someone said to me, the best things in life are surfing and sex. And I was like, oh my God, I need to go surfing,
That sounds like Kim and Ami.
Right? But why would you want to miss out on the best part of life? If you ask people, what's the most amazingly fun thing you do? Many, many people are going to say outrageous sex with someone that I care about. Mm-hmm. It's sort of and you can have really great sex with yourself too. Don't think I'm saying you need a partner, because you don't. In fact, you need to be able to pleasure yourself separately in order to
Yeah.
have a good relationship with a partner anyway.
And
Okay.
I think, yeah, and I think it emanates every part of your life. And I think a lot of people I speak to, unfortunately, when I talk about sex, I'm going to open up this box and it's so important. Let's find this other plateau, or let's learn some new things. And I meet women who are like, nah, it's just not that important to me. And, I've got so many other problems in my life. I think, well, but maybe some of this will solve some of the problems. But so there's a point where I want to, I want to convince them, like, wow, there's this great other space. We got to learn about it. But then I also think, well, maybe I should respect that. Maybe they are happy. Maybe they're fine. That
Not
I
fine.
don't really know.
I shouldn't say that, but I mean, I've been observing people for decades. They're not fine. They're not fine. I mean, actually, let me disagree with myself for a minute. There are people who are asexual. There are people who just sexuality really truly isn't important to them, and they declare that, and that is totally fine. Nobody has to have an orgasm. Nobody has to be sexual. It's not required to be on earth. But most of the time, when I hear that in my office, which is all the time, it's because I'm anxious. I've got trauma that I haven't dealt with. I'm totally strung out trying to pay the rent and care for the people in my life. I am fitting myself into boxes personally. I've got what's hard out here, and then I've got the critic on the inside. And that's the problem. And that's why sex is not appealing. So let's talk about sex after 50, blocks to sex after 50. So some of them are true for everybody, which is busyness. Though women, this is actually not true so much after 60. Good news. I also just want to say, women are having the best sex of their lives after 50 in my practice. Not occasionally, but on a regular basis.
Yay.
Many of them, because they're not actually, they don't have young ones at home. If you had children, no need to have kids. But if you did, they tend to be maturing around this age. And after they leave, couples get happier. For real. I'm not saying I don't love my kids, but it's easier. And that part can get better with time. The other thing that's happening around this age is, if you are lucky enough to have your parents, they're older, and there can be a lot of caretaking happening, and that can also be stressful. And then at this age is peak income. So this is when really, we're trying to have a stable place to live. Maybe we're financing college for kids if we had kids, and we're at peak earning capacity, because Lord knows how long we're going to live, and we have to actually provide for ourselves. So that's a lot to wrap into this particular moment in time, and can be really stressful. And then the hormonal whammy. And I would be so sad if we didn't talk about this. So I'm going to bring it up right now. Your hormones matter enormously to your sex life, enormously. So perimenopause starts after 40, like around 42, and menopause on average goes to 60. Wow. Okay. 40 to 60, ladies. That's 20 years. That's 20 years. And it's those really high potency years of parenting and caretaking and working, right? That's a big piece of time. It's also when we can be of influence in the world. So it's an important time. And fluctuating estrogen levels and stress makes this worse, by the way, isn't that special? Fluctuating estrogen levels and dropping progesterone in the 40s causes anxiety, insomnia, irritability, irregular menses, sometimes very heavy menses, and irregular sex drive. And by the time you get closer to menopause and into menopause, there is a drop in desire, usually during that transition, because there's dropping testosterone as well. But after menopause, testosterone has a more prominent appearance. So even if you never took hormones, when you get through menopause, testosterone can be prominent again. So a lot of my patients have a resurgence of sex drive and have a great sex life in their late 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s. I had a couple where I had to get him a hip replacement because they were having so much sex in their 80s and he couldn't be in the positions he wanted. So
I love that.
It is entirely possible. It is all possible. The things that get in the way are the hormones, the crazy and the dropping libido, the lack of lubrication. So after menopause, when your periods stop, there is less estrogen to the vulva. And that means that the skin of the vulva gets thinner and more fragile and more likely to have micro tears. Think of it as vaginal road rash, as the penis is, rubbing up against that, if it's a heterosexual, but even if you're lesbian, any kind of penetration, fingers, dildo, doesn't matter, causes little micro tears. And what it feels like is burning. And that is, for all of you, 100% reversible, 100% reversible. All you need is topical estrogen, which is fine for almost everyone, unless you actively have breast cancer, uterine cancer, or ovarian cancer. And we could talk about that. And it's even safe then sometimes. Things have changed. I just gave a lecture on hormone replacement therapy to a medical conference. Where we were 5 years ago is not where we are now. So we used to say the lowest amount of hormones for the smallest amount of time. And now we say appropriate hormones in the appropriate kind of hormones at the appropriate dose between 50 and 60. And when you do that between 50 and 60, we reduce overall mortality. Here's the other thing. We have better sex because we have better estrogenation of the vulva and a little bit of a normalization of hormones. Many women are also deficient in testosterone, which can also be a stress-induced problem. So again, whatever we can do, meditation, exercise, screaming in your car,
You said sex, increases testosterone.
Sex does. Sex increases testosterone. Very helpful. And I give testosterone to women who have low libido and measured low testosterone. I don't do it willy-nilly. You need to measure your levels and give an appropriate dose, which I think this is true in Europe as well. But in the United States, there is no testosterone for women made by pharmaceutical companies because we suck. We suck. We don't care about women's pleasure, but it can be compounded and can be really helpful. So between getting better lubrication so that sex is not painful. Nobody wants sex when it's painful. Nobody wants sex when it's painful. Duh. Why would you have libido? So we have to take care of that part. I have helped a 75-year-old go from not having sex for 25 years because her husband rejected her after she got pregnant.
Wow.
To having penetrative sex again. So you can reverse this. It's better to do it from the beginning, but even if you haven't had sex for years, it is possible. One of the exercises in that book and in the Taoist practice is the jade egg exercise, which I recommend. Really cool. If you're interested, my favorite person is Saida Desilets. We could talk about that more if you want. But it's putting an egg inside your vagina and moving it. And also it's a spiritual exercise too, which we can talk about more. But I helped her be able to do that exercise and then have vaginal pleasure again and penetration. It's entirely possible. It's just about, topical estrogen and gradual dilation for comfort. So when I think about women after 50, it's where are your hormones? How's your vulva? How's your life? Do we have time for flirting and sexy movies and, dancing and music and a glass of champagne? Are you making time for your sensual self and honoring your sensual self? I always say a female needs to be rested, connected, and free of worries. And if she's not rested, connected, and free of worries, it doesn't work very well.
When you say connected, what do you mean?
If you're going to have partnered sex, if you're going to have sex with someone else, there has to be connection. And, again, male sexuality is different. If you're with a male partner, some female sexuality is different too, right? We were talking about how gender really crosses over quite a bit. There's a lot of women with a more yang sex drive. But many people and most women are not like that. So we have to harmonize with eye contact and emotional connection before sex is easy.
So these are great. I understand these are great solutions. So if you are considering estrogen or testosterone, please go see your doctor. That's for sure. and the yoni egg. People, if you, it's not the yoni egg, the jade egg. Your book actually has some great resources. I have to say, you recommend books and videos and things that where we can get all of this. So please get the book, guys. The Multi-Orgasmic Woman, and on your website, you also have other great things. So, but what I wanted to know then, for particularly for women over 50, who, so we have the full range of situations: divorce, partners, new partners. But what about the woman who has been with her partner for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years? I want to go into, I don't want to talk about just women who are 50. I want to talk about women who are 60, 70,
Yes,
80.
yes, yes.
I'm only 51, but this is my future. So I'm very curious to know, what does the future look like? And so, what is it, how, if you were with the same partner for so long, and I get this question whenever I have a person talking about sex in my group, very often just someone who asks, okay, well, what do you do to rekindle the fire when you've been together for so long? And you do get some great stuff in the book, but I would like to hear from you. What are your top ones to get over that?
Yeah. So I've been with my partner for 32 years, just for starters. I'm 54. And I don't think we've ever had a better intimate life than we have now, in all ways. So it's definitely possible. I'm not saying it's simple because it has to do with growing together, right? So the first thing I'm going to say is, are you actually connecting with each other? And I don't mean sitting down side by side and watching Netflix. Like, are you actually talking about what matters? How are you? What's really alive in your life right now? How do you feel about what you wanted in your life and where you are? How are how are your friendships? Big, are you connecting in a significant way with your partner? And are you catching up with each other in that way? Because people develop and change. And if you don't actually engage, you're no longer walking parallel paths together. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, you got to break out of your habits. So the other thing I'll say, Zora, we were talking about how complicated sex can be sometimes, right? Well, that's why we learn patterns. Oh, it works great when we have oral sex and clitoral stimulation and whatever, you come up with your pattern. That's not a problem. We like to call that the multi-orgasmic quickie. It's fine. It's good. So we like it. But if you want to keep it hot, if you want to keep the water boiling, right? Because it's become tepid, because if it's the same thing, the brain likes novelty. The brain likes novelty, and it'll take anything, right? So you could wear something different. You could be in a different room. That's why everybody talks about having hotel sex, right? Or vacation sex. You're in a different place. You're in a different place. That's a new thing, right? The brain likes that now. Now it's awake. Now you have more nerve endings going. So you have to mix it up as you go. And there are 1,000 ways to do that. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be little things. Oh, I bought this new oil. Let's try that out. What do you think about, or, oh my God, I read this thing and you should. I'm a big fan of reading things that are sexy, watching things that are sexy. If you want to have a great sexual life, you got to feed that in the same way you feed your body good food. You got to feed it good information, and not stuff that you don't like, because that would be like giving your body junk food, right? So fun, sexy movies, erotica, whatever you like, doing something different, even if it's small. And real connection, real catching up with each other, because I don't care how long you've been together, you don't know this person. This person is an unfolding miracle, and so are you. And there are things that you thought today that you've never thought before. And if you're not sharing that edge of who you are, that edge of knowing with your partner, you're not giving them the good stuff. And they need to share back with you. And that's what makes it interesting.
Such great advice. We're gonna have to get into this. It reminds me, when growing up, spending a lot of time in Europe. I think I'm now more in Europe than in the US, but it was when we watched TV, because now we're more digital. Who watches actual TV screens anymore? It's really not as common as it was. And there was always some kind of porn on TV. Like, that's just Europe. It's at 10 o'clock at night. And you're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then, that definitely helps. But nowadays, it's probably been about 10 years since I've watched TV. So now I'm thinking, where then do you find uh, stimulating porn that's sort of women friendly? Because now I've watched, I don't know if
So
you know
much.
Dear Aline, and she was talking about how you shouldn't watch porn because you're supporting a bad trade. And I'm like, oh, then I need to find like sustainable porn, or like,
I
where do
love
I
this
go
conversation.
now?
I love this conversation. Okay, so I work, as you can imagine, because I work in sex and health, I work with sexual trauma all the time. So I am not saying that there isn't an enormous amount of sexual trauma and that there isn't currently a huge problem with young people in pornography, because there is, and it's bad for the mind, because what you consume as a young person makes an imprint on your brain that stays with you. So we have to be careful. That said, there's erotic video and movies created by women for women that is sex affirming and sex positive, and there's nothing wrong with that. So this is a don't throw the baby out with the bathwater situation, in my opinion. I also think that, remember how we've been talking about boxes, all the boxes we put ourselves in? Well, I'm sorry, ladies, but fuck that. Over 50, who cares, right? We are now in charge of ourselves. So if there's something that turns you on, it's fine. And everything that turns you on doesn't have to be something you want to happen in your life. It's not, your fantasy is different from your chosen physical reality. And it's okay to have fantasies that are a little edgy. You know, it's all right. It doesn't make you a bad person. If you're not acknowledging what's in your unconscious, and for all of us, we've got all kinds of crazy shit in our unconscious. If you're not acknowledging that and bringing it forward, then it's just haunting you from behind. It didn't go anywhere. It's okay to be turned on by certain things, but not endorse them in your political life.
So where do you get this stuff?
So lots of places. So my favorite places, there are here in the U.S., but it's online, so I might be available. There's a store started by women that's all over the San Francisco Bay Area called Good Vibrations. Actually, in the back of the Multi-Orgasmic Man, I have a bunch of them. There's another beautiful one in Seattle, and they will tell you which ones are women created, which ones are lesbian, which ones are bi, which ones are gender non-binary, how significant it is, whether it includes anal, whether it includes multiples, but they'll tell you specifically here, oh, what do you want? What are you interested in? Oh, here you go, and steer you in the right direction, because we don't want to traumatize you. We don't want to traumatize you with content. We want something that's fun for you, maybe a little edgy, just a little edgy, but fun.
Yeah. Oh, this is wonderful. So we can go get that resource in the other book, The Multi-Orgasmic Man. And
And the multi-orgasmic woman.
It's also in The Multi-Orgasmic Woman. And
Yeah, at the end.
Perfect. Well, I really think we need a part two, because we've already talked for an hour, and I have like about 52 other questions that I didn't ask.
And do we have any audience questions?
Yes, I would love to open up the panel, and all of you guys who are here right now. It's such a privilege to be here, and I'd love for you to, anyone who wants to unmute, go for it. And we can ask your questions right now. We have probably about 10, 15 more minutes before Dr. Rachel has to go. I know you guys have questions.
You can also put a question in the chat, everybody, if that's easier for you, given what's going on in your day or morning, depending on where you are.
Yeah, maybe some people are at the gym or doing things. Go for it and have it in the chat, or undo your mic, or have a thank you. That's, or any testimonials. Maybe some of Dr. Rachel from other areas. Would love to hear from you.
Hi, Dr. Rachel. It's Jill.
Hi, Jill.
Hi. How are you? Let me unmute. Hi.
Hi. What would you like to ask?
So my question is dating and sex with different ages. So I'm dating a guy who's a little bit younger than me.
Great.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the future too. So I'm just wondering, is that something that will be exciting for both of us to explore and develop as I age and as I change? Yeah. And it seems like we match up really well right now, but
Well, honestly, from a Taoist point of view, and even from a Western science point of view, a woman in women peak sexually, men peak sexually at like 20, and women peak sexually in their late 30s. So it's really different. And I have a ton of older women with slightly younger men in my practice because it's a better match. And women in their 40s and 50s can be super sexual, and young men, it's easier for them, and it's a little harder for men actually at that age, at 50, 60, 70 sometimes. Not everybody, but sometimes. And if your question is, how do we keep you sexually alive in that relationship? Absolutely possible. Got lots of couples like that in my practice, and it's not a problem. But I do think hormones are helpful in that particular, and in a safe way, right? Not in a crazy way, but small amounts, and regular sex. You know, there is a little bit of that use it or lose it phenomenon. So regular sex as we age keeps the vagina moisturized, keeps the vagina flexible, you know, helps us continue to be sexually active. And some of my patients need no hormones at all because they're just continuing to be sexually active and lubricate themselves. And sex and orgasm increase estrogen and testosterone also, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank
Great.
you.
You're so welcome. Great to see you. And Terry has a question. What about orgasm with anal intercourse? Taboo subject. Not here, my friend. Is this as impacted the same way with hormones? Okay, great question. So anal sex is enjoyed by a lot of people of multiple genders. And the anus has a lot of nerve endings. Remember how we were talking about how it's like the whole breastfeeding and orgasm thing, like there's a technique here, like you gotta have some knowledge. More so with anal sex, even more so with anal sex, because the anus doesn't lubricate naturally. So I'm going to suggest, if you want to play around with anal play, and that's a nice way to spice up your sex life, just going to say, then you really want to learn about it. You want to read about it. It requires a little, you have to go slow. You have to be gentle. You must have lubrication. All that said, if you're enjoying anal sex, that changes exactly not at all after menopause. Just saying, another great option, because the anus is not affected by estrogen. It's not a mucous membrane in the same way. And yes, pleasure should be exactly the same. And when my patients have less pleasure after menopause, they come see me because that's not normal. A little less libido during the menopausal transition, totally normal. Less pleasure, no. Okay.
I'm so glad she asked that question because that was also one of my questions. You did cover that a little bit in the book. And so I'm wondering then, so you say go slow, read about it. Now, when you're thinking about, and so glad you're in California because you'll get this question, is when it comes to creams and lubrication, we're all so scared about what does the body absorb and doesn't absorb? Do we need something clean, quote unquote clean? Or is there something you recommend? Is it this in terms of lubrication, and can you use it both for the anus and for the vagina?
Super good question. So we prefer, for someone, if condoms are involved, you have to use a water soluble lubricant, and you're going to have to buy that. And there are a bunch of great ones, and there's a lot of natural ones that I really like and I think are helpful. If we're not dealing with condoms, well, then you can use whatever the heck you want. So for vaginal sex, I think the easiest, most convenient, purest, and tasty thing to use is coconut oil.
Easy.
Yeah. Great. Oh. Totally great. And for the anus, that would also be okay, but you need the lubricant in the anus to be long lasting, which is why some people really like silicone lubricants. Now they stay more. It's not my favorite for vagina for that same reason. It doesn't go away. It doesn't wash away with water, and it's not like a natural oil that absorbs. But you certainly could use coconut oil. Places like Good Vibrations are so essential here because people will talk you through the 12 different, lubricants that you can use and how and why, and what about this one and what about that one, and this one tastes good, and this one, they've all got their different things. The important thing if you're using anal play is just not to mix, right? So the toy that goes in the anus can't go in the vagina because we have a different microflora, different microbiome in the vagina than we have in the anus. They're cousins, they're related to each other, but they're different. So you can give yourself a vaginal infection if you do anal play, and then either fingers or toy or penis or whatever are then in the vagina.
Okay, so it'll be clean. Everything's sterilized or in some way.
Yeah, I mean, clean is a misnomer, this is a place of bacteria in a good way. Like a vagina, just like many of you are familiar with the intestinal microbiome, there is a vaginal microbiome, and it lives inside the vagina and on the vulva, and that's normal, and we want that, and that's what keeps us healthy. Obviously, the anus is it's your intestinal microbiome coming through the anus. So we've got bacteria. We're not trying to be antibacterial here, and please don't use anything antibacterial on the vulva. That would be harsh, and perhaps damaging. But
isn't coconut oil somewhat antibacterial?
It is a little bit antifungal and antibacterial, yeah.
But it wouldn't harm the problem. It wouldn't be problematic, right?
No, not problematic at all. I love coconut oil. Another question from the chat here is, you mentioned rested, connected, and free of worry. How to increase connection with a guy not too curious. Right. This is a question I get frequently. So you have to make a setting in which it encourages the interaction. So it may be that you have to take responsibility for that, but I'm a massive, the book 8 Dates came out of the fact that I've had a date with my husband every night for about 32 years. That's why we're still married. I'm not kidding, like really. And we used to have rules about date night. Like when we had children, we weren't allowed to talk about the children, and we weren't allowed to talk about money, so that we would talk about something else, something that was about us, or was about fun, or was about what we were thinking. So you have to create a situation in which you can have that connection. And I'm going to suggest like a dinner date or something where you've got him away from the house and away from the TV and away from all those distractions. And then you just have to ask curious questions. I work with the Gottmans. I wrote the 8 Dates book and the Man's Guide to Women book with them. They have actually, the book 8 Dates would be a great resource for you, because all those questions are in the book. So it's 8 dates, with each date being a different conversation. One of them is sex, by the way. And we make it easy. We've got a cheat sheet. We know who we're dealing with. We've got like a little summary page and a cheat sheet, and where you can gives you all the questions to ask to sort of draw people out. And you have to ask with a really curious, open heart, like you don't know this person, because they are a different person today than they were yesterday, whether it seems that way or not. So the listening is really important. But if you can do that and you ask those questions, it's amazing what you can draw out of even the most like, oh, I don't want to talk about, serious issues, or I'm introverted, or I just don't like speaking partner.
Such great advice. Absolutely love that. I'm going to go get that one too. So I actually, speaking of books, I'm going to have to let you go, because I know you have to get to your practice.
Yeah.
If there's anyone dying for the last minute question, please undo your mic right now before I close this. Okay. All right, then I really, really need to have you back on and have a second round, because I have so many more questions. You are amazing. I absolutely loved this conversation. I hope everyone who's listening got comfortable with the words that we're talking about. If you have any confusion, you are more than welcome to reach out to Dr. Rachel Abrams, and Facebook and Instagram. It's Dr. DOCTOR Rachel Abrams, and I'll have this in the show notes. And you're also you can get the books at drrachel.com/books. The same thing, doctor is all spelled out. And you actually got a couple of websites, the drrachel.com, and you have Santa Cruz integrativemedicine.com if people want to see you in person, which I totally do, and I'm planning to see you. And you got some great blogs on thriveglobal.com and medium.com. Before I let you go, are there any last thoughts or messages you really want to share with us before we go?
Oh, I really appreciate all of you being here. I know, at least for those of you on the West Coast of the United States, it's very early to be having this conversation. And thank you for having it with me. It makes it so much more meaningful. And thank you to my sister, my best friend, Heather, my mother, Patricia, who are on the call, and all my patients. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Love you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Good night, good morning, wherever you guys are.